Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Hey, hey.
Thank you all for joining us tonight. I'm excited about this conversation. I know it's gotten a lot of buzz. I think other people are really interested in it as well as a topic overall. So excited to see where you all go with it, and all the smarts and intelligence and knowledge and experience that you bring to this. So before we begin, I just want to go ahead and introduce all of you. So for those of you who are at home watching us, or maybe you're watching the playback on our YouTube channel, we have with us three fabulous therapists, counselors, practitioners with us this evening. First, I'll introduce Tiffany Farmer, LMFT. Tiffany is a licensed marriage and family therapist and the owner of Best Life Mental Health Services, LLC, which is located in St. Matthews if you're here in Louisville. She's been working as a therapist for the past 6 years and has worked with children in both residential and foster care settings, families, and with adults. Most recently, she has focused with her work with adults dealing with stressors associated with relationship issues, such as depression, anxiety, attachment wounds, and trauma. Tiffany enjoys working with other therapists who are taking the leap into private practice and developing their goals and reaching their business aspirations. She is a wife, a mother of 4, and has always been an advocate for racial equality, access to excellent mental health services, and rights for the LGBTQ plus community. So welcome, Tiffany. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
And then we have Alaina Newman, who's an LPCC supervisor. And Alaina is a native of Louisville. She graduated in 2013 from Lindsey Wilson College with her master's in education in mental health and counseling. Alaina has worked in a plethora of settings, including substance abuse and in-home services. However, Alaina is currently serving the community through Meridian Behavioral Health, a local group practice. As a generalist, she provides therapy for a variety of mental health diagnoses, but has a primary focus on anxiety, depression, and trauma. She's trained in EMDR and uses an integrative approach to therapy. So welcome, Alaina. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And finally, we have Dr. Stephen Kniffley, who is an innovative and courageous and committed leader willing to leverage his time, talent, and resources to uplift marginalized communities and create spaces of healing for the oppressed. Dr. Kniffley is an assistant professor in the School of Professional Psychology at Spalding University and associate director at the Center for Behavioral Health at Spalding University as well. Welcome, Dr. Kniffley. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me here.
All right, so we will go ahead and begin our topic, and I will step out basically and let you all have at it. So enjoy.
Well, I guess our night is Black Girl Magic, Black Boy Joy. And so we can only see each other. So I don't know who all is in our crowd tonight, but it might be important just for us to start out with talking about what does that mean? Maybe we each have probably had an individual experience with these concepts. And so what does Black Girl Magic or Black Boy Joy mean for each of us?
Yeah, so I'll start out with just kind of talking about Black Girl Magic. I think that embedded in this notion of Black Girl Magic, right, is obviously uplifting and this idea that Black women have something that's special that other women cannot necessarily claim and grab hold to. But I think also embedded in it is this idea of being a strong Black woman. And I think that is a notion that has two sides to it, essentially. I think that it's obviously, again, attempting this empowerment and this notion that we can kind of overcome a number of events that others may not be able to. But in it also is this idea that we somehow transcend like multiple dimensions of emotional expression. And so we are not able to express vulnerability, or we are not able to express sadness or struggle. And there has to be sort of this relentless pursuit towards success and relentless support that we provide for Black men that are in our lives, Black children, the Black community, without any real expectation of mutuality. And so I think the implication of that is that we get into this, we kind of have this pigeonhole that ends up happening, where it's like, if you express boundaries or if you express limitations, that is also saying that you are in fact not strong enough to be, to reach the level that we have set out for Black women to reach. And rather than it being that that's taking good care of yourself, right? So I think that this notion of Black girl magic is one that we should embrace, but that we also need to understand the nuances to, and the ways in which we may apply that to also sort of prescribe to Black women how they should respond in certain situations, and what is an appropriate kind of array of responses in order to still be qualified as being or having access to Black girl magic.
Ooh, you went for it. You jumped. You jumped right in. I was ready to be like, Black girl magic is like a celebration, and I will remember my first time really experiencing it was on Twitter, because social media, right, is life. And clicking the tag and like seeing these amazing things that women who looked like me were doing. Mm-hmm. And it was exciting. I was like, girl, what you did? What? That's amazing. Mm-hmm. And I remember feeling that excitement of like, oh man, this is for me, because I'm used to being in spaces where we celebrate things, but I have to be mindful of how I do things or how I present myself or how I say things. And so this was a space where at first it was like, oh man, I can just be like, we can talk about the natural hair process and it just be cool. It don't be a whole thing I gotta temper myself or think through. Well, as you go through time, I start thinking about how like as it became more mainstream, I noticed it came with more weight. Mm-hmm. So as it became this mainstream thing that people started to see and hear and interact with who weren't Black, it became this thing where, like when I think magical, I think mystic, like kind of this unknown, we don't get to see how the magician does the trick. We just get to see it. And so sort of what you were talking about, Tiffany, it takes away from, like, we see these women being celebrated, but we haven't talked about what it took to actually get there. Mm-hmm. And of course, we got a whole hour to have this conversation, but, that was, to hear, you went right for it. I was like, yes, Tiffany, yes. But Black girl magic for me, it's a mixture of things. Like when I hear it, I think of very specific women, like I'm a Beyonce fanatic. So let's be honest, like Beyonce for me is part of the epitome of Black girl magic. But then I think about my grandmother, who like was a foster mom, and then she raised 5 kids of her own, and all these things she did. She helped raise us. But I know for a fact there were silent battles she never got to speak out loud because she had to be a wife. She had to put on the facade. So Black girl magic, it's a beautiful thing, but it's a laborious thing sometimes too, as So what about you, Dr. Kniffley? What about Black boy joy? Like,
and please just call me Steven.
Yes, sir.
Did you serve me too?
It's a habit. I'll work on it.
We're in the South-ish,
Yeah. All right.
My daddy might be watching. I got to be careful.
That's fair. So there are 3 things that I think of when it comes to Black boy joy: self-determination, resiliency, and flexible masculinity performance. So if we're on the outside looking in, when we see Black males and Black boys, there doesn't appear to be a lot to have joy around. So if we think about parentification, so for many Black males, they are forced to grow up early to help take care of their homes, to help take care of their siblings, to be essentially, end quote, the man of the house before they're ready to do those type of tasks. If we think about what the science says, Black boys are aged about 2 to 3 years more compared to their white male counterparts. And that's how we end up with the Tamir Rices and things along those lines, where folks just see our young men, our young boys as older than they are, and then have expectations around the intentionality of their behavior. And so on the outside looking in, there's less joy to see. But there's just something beautiful about being a Black man. There's just something wonderful about being a Black boy. When you see our young guys playing in the street, when you see them discovering themselves, when you see them celebrating folks around them, that really highlights the idea of self-determination. When we're able to say that you don't get to decide who I am as a Black man, as a Black boy. I don't care what the stats are supposed to say about who I am. I determine who I am. As the proverb says, if I conquer the enemy within, the enemy without can do me no harm. Which means that for many of our young men, they have to overcome these internalized ways of thinking about themselves that have caused them so many difficulties. And so that's the self-determination part. When I think about the resiliency part, I'm reminded of this idea that there is a history that has passed through our ancestry from my early ancestor here in Kentucky that was a slave in Kniffley, Kentucky, that has passed down all the way to me as a first doctor in our family, that has really suggested that we have the ability to cope from within in terms of the DNA that exists within us. And part of our role from a Black Boy Joy standpoint is to help folks to realize that they have that resiliency and to be able to rediscover that for themselves. And then the last piece is around flexible masculinity. So for many of our Black boys, society, their peers, even their own families have told them that there's only one way that they can present as a Black boy. They have to be dumb, deviant, and dangerous individuals. But there's a whole narrative that exists outside of that that encompasses that joy that we're referring to. And so when we think about what Black boy joy can look like, it's being on the outside looking in, recognizing that there is so much to celebrate, so much to affirm and be excited for when it comes to a Black boy, and recognizing that there lies in self-determination, resiliency, and flexible masculinity performance.
Mm-hmm.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah, I really, when I think of Black Boy Joy, that flexible masculinity piece is the one that I think sticks out the most to me. And I think maybe it's because as a Black woman, I think about the ways that we're kind of prescribed how we should behave, right? So I think about the fact that Black Boy Joy is in a lot of ways like flying in the face of what we prescribe for Black men as like these kind of one-dimensional characters, right? So you're either nonchalant or you're angry, right? You're either a threat or you are like shiftless, right? Versus it being, you know, I have contours as well, right? So I can love, I can laugh, I can enjoy, you know, a healthy sense of humor, I can enjoy affection between both, you know, me and other men and me and women. And that all of those things can have a certain level of purity that I feel like we don't often assign to Black men, right? So the fact that it's not like a laugh that's like rooted in some like evil deception that they're working on, or it's not something, you know, that's part of like some scheme that's taking place or some plot that's happening, but that it's just this innocence, right? And I think about oftentimes, I don't know what it is. This is kind of probably something I probably shouldn't say on the internet, but when I think of Black Boy Joy, I always think of like those pictures of little boys when they're standing on like playgrounds and they have like this stance and they have like their belly stuck out and they're just sitting there smiling and they're just happy, right? So I think about that like healthy expression of childhood that we oftentimes take away from Black boys because we tell them from the time that they first come out, we start calling them man and we, you know, tell them you can't cry because, you know, boys cry, men don't, right? Or these types of things that we prescribe towards Black men. And I really think that Black Boy Joy, and I don't know, I'd like to get your all's opinion on this. Do you all think that Black Boy Joy is more positive than it is negative? Or do you feel like there is a underbelly of Black Boy Joy in the same way that there is that we've described with Black Girl Magic?
That's a good question. I hadn't really thought about Black Boy Joy in that way because every experience I've had with it, it's been in a space where we're celebrating that boy or that man. We're creating space for healthy expression and just a space where you can be authentic. So I don't want to speak as a man, because that's not my space, but I know when I have attempted to engage with that, I do my best to make it a celebratory thing, because it makes me think about, like, I have a small child and she's only 2, but we have already been in spaces where she's experienced racism. She's experienced what it's like to be a little Black girl. And she, of course, doesn't completely comprehend. She's just not being allowed to play here or do certain things. And so every time I've engaged with the concept or tried to do that, I've tried to be intentional about making it celebratory. But Stephen might have a different experience with that.
Well, I always wonder so if we think about the Black woman and the Black male dynamic, Black men are allowed to be angry and Black women are allowed to be sad. And so if we think about joy and magic, really what we're referring to, or underneath that, is permission to express a wide range of emotion. Like when we say things like fierce or assertive or all those things, when we refer to Black women, what we're also suggesting is that they are expressing emotions outside of just sadness and suffering and long suffering, but they're able to establish themselves as viable, vibrant, and affirming human beings. And when we see a Black male engage in joy, what we're saying is that Black male doesn't have to just necessarily be this angry person that is walking around all of the time, just frustrated with the world. And so really what all this is kind of encompassing is this idea that we are allowed to experience a flexible emotional dynamic where we can be angry and assertive and all those things that go along with that, but we can also experience joy and happiness and celebration as well.
So I have a question for the group. So in thinking about this, do either of you feel like this is more of an external pressure or like an external force? Is it more of an internal force, like as an individual, even like within the Black community culture? Because what we're talking about is this ability for free expression. Like, these terms have created this space for free expression. So when did we lose the ability to actually express, right? Like, when was that taken? Where did we lose it? Did we ever have it? That's probably a lot of questions at once, but that's how it came to me.
Slavery.
Yeah, right.
I mean, if you think about it, I cannot imagine that there would be a lot to be excited about if someone took you from your homeland, marched you over here on a boat, you witnessed the atrocities of the Middle Passage, you then somehow made it over here and were subjected to generational slavery, where it wasn't just you that was enslaved, but your kids, your kids' kids, your kids' kids, etc. It seems like there would be there wouldn't be a lot to be excited about. But that kind of goes back to the resiliency piece, because if you go to Africa and visit the various countries, what you will discover is that people realize that joy comes from relationship and it comes from connection. And these are things that, regardless of who tries to take that from us, are too strong, right? They're too strong to be broken. And so when our families were separated and then we had to make new families, we were able to do that and continue that resiliency. When they tried to treat us like we were human beings, weren't capable of loving one another and engaging in marriage, we were able to find other ways to demonstrate what that commitment looked like to us. And so we just found other ways to transform that joy and to transform that magic outside of the suffering we experienced.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think as like an offset of that, or like as the timeline kind of continues in Reconstruction and Jim Crow, we're dealing with a lot of punitive actions if in fact we display our emotions or our feelings in any raw way, right? So there's a lot of correction from heads of households that are saying, you need to stay in line, you don't look this person in the face, you don't express an array of emotion in public, because that can turn into being interpreted as something that's disrespectful to white people or something that could wind up turning fatal, right? So I think also, as we're dealing with our Black men, you know, constantly being lynched, constantly being jailed, we have our Black women who are having to keep those families together in the absence of men. And that creates this like long suffering, the strife, this like relentless pursuit towards success, because I have to hold it together for our family. And there's all of these circumstances that have happened to our family that are outside of our control, right? So your father did not cause himself to be lynched. Your brother did not cause himself to be jailed, and yet like this is where we're at. And so we are in this circumstance. This is what's happening. And so I have to keep you together emotionally as my children. I have to keep this household together financially. And so, you know, now the output of that, and, you know, everything is not negative in the sense that, you know, the output of that is, you know, Black women are, you know, some of the highest like one of the highest achieving demographics, or if not the highest achieving demographic in terms of receiving college degrees at this point, right? So there is a positive outcome that we can look at with regards to that, but it comes from this space of, if I don't do it, who else will? And if I can't do it, then my family will continue to suffer as a result of that. And so I think that all of those things that have happened to us throughout our history from slavery forward in America has kind of put us into the position where there are both internal and external expectations. So there's the internal expectations from within the community that we have to overcome, right? Whatever this vacuous thing is that we're trying to overcome, whether that be whiteness or just what the last generation before us did, right? And then there's the expectation from outside of our community that we will behave in ways that are only within the small scope that we're given, right? So again, Black men in terms of anger and Black women in terms, well, really both Black men and Black women are expected to be angry in their interactions. If you think about like the debate from last night, like no matter how much Kamala Harris tried to smile and be pleasant and all of these things or whatever, there was still commentary that she was very angry throughout the night, right? So there's all this like expectation from outside of the Black community about what it is that we will present ourselves as. And I think we do internalize some of that. And we either internalize that as okay, so that's what I will go out and do, right? Like I will fulfill those expectations, or we internalize it as something that we're constantly in battle against. So I need to speak a certain way or carry myself a certain way or behave in a certain way in order to kind of fly in the face of the expectations of people from outside of my race.
Well, so I've recently really got into somatic experiencing, like therapy. Like my actual therapist is a somatic experiencing practitioner, and she recommended this book to me that I've been reading. And it's by Resme, I can't say his last name, but it's called My Grandmother's Hands. And the whole concept of the book is talking through racial trauma and how white bodies carry it versus how Black bodies carry it. And hearing you all talk, I think about how there were things taught to me. I had not ever personally had like this really negative experience with a white person yet, but I had already been taught how to be cautious. I had already taught respectability. Here's how you have to speak, right? And that came from a generational thing. You know, multiple generations back, of course we come from slavery, and I had family who did that. And then coming through, like you were talking about Jim Crow, and family who was actively engaging in resistance and protest and social justice. And our bodies, like our brains have even been put in a position where we're having to constantly think, fight, flight, freeze. What do we need to do? And we teach that almost inherently to our children, because of course our main goal is to protect, but it even becomes it's like this generational trauma, right? And so like my 2-year-old has already had some experience because mom's afraid, like, you know, I see people looking like me in danger. And so I think like hearing you talk about that, Tiffany, that's what it made me think about, is like there are times where we're passing things down and it's almost inherent. We don't, it's second nature, right? Like I remember when I first got married, like I would come home and I needed to cook, clean, blah, 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 blah. And I remember my therapist at the time going, baby, who set that expectation? And I was like, huh? She was like, did your husband ask for that? And I was like, I had to really sit and search, where did I get that from? And so I think also when I think about Black Girl Magic, I like the idea of reclamation, just taking something back for myself. Because so much of my life, so much of being a Black woman feels like I've been asked to put out. I'm constantly having to think, what do I look like in this space? How am I talking in this space? What am I doing in this space? Do I look less demanding? Do I look aggressive? Am I coming off as soft? And I don't take for granted, as a fair skinned Black woman, I have a different set of privilege and advantage than like a darker skinned Black woman. So there's probably even another complexity to that. And so, you know, I think as we're talking, that's just what was in my mind hearing you all talk. I was like, dang, this is really generational. And the nuances might be a little bit different, but the thread is the same, if that makes sense.
Definitely.
So if I could add from like a science standpoint, a couple of terms for us to consider to help frame our conversation around this intergenerational transmission of trauma. There are this idea of racial legacy versus racial literacy. And so if we think about this idea of racial legacy, as soon as I say a couple of things here, everybody will be like, oh, okay, yeah, I get it. Is this ideal of there have been certain anecdotal messages that have been passed down through our families for generations. So I can remember in my own home, my grandma saying, baby, you got to work twice as hard to get half as much to them white folks, right? You know, you have to, just like be prepared for the world to be dangerous as a Black and brown individual out here. And the interesting thing about those racial legacy messages is that it for sure prepared us, right? It let us know that things are going to be really tough out here. And those are those generational messages that were passed down. But it also caused a state of fear and put many of us in boxes because it's like, well, gosh, this world is dangerous. What does that mean for the other people that look like me? Are they dangerous too? Should I be scared of my own folks? Which then I internalize, which makes me then scared of people, of myself, and angry at myself, and start to hate myself as well. So what the literature is really started saying instead is we have to be teaching our youth and teaching one another racial literacy skills. And what that refers to is being able to accurately assess a situation as racist, being able to look within to find those coping skills that we have, to be able to address that racist situation, and then being able to accurately assess that we've accomplished our goal when it comes to addressing the racist encounter. And that feels differently. So instead of just passing on a couple of messages that say that the world is dangerous, instead what we're offering up instead is a way to say, yes, baby, the world is dangerous, but here's what you can do about it. And that's where the intergenerational transmission of trauma can stop. If we can stop passing down that narrative, is by having those skills to let us know that we can do something about it.
So yeah, that's so important. I'm sorry.
Oh, you go ahead.
That's so important in the context of like what we're experiencing in Louisville right now. I think about like what our kids in Louisville, and I'm sure this has happened in other like racialized hotspots essentially, right, within the last 20 years or so, where kids are being exposed to really like blatant racism in ways that we all kind of thought on some level would not happen again in our lifetime, right? And having to be exposed to activism in a certain way, and trying to figure out like what does it mean if mommy's going to a protest or daddy's speaking at this thing, or those kinds of things. And I think about the Berkeley study that a lot of this chat was based on, which was around how the strong Black woman schema really kind of fits into a Black woman's experience and where it comes from. And the fact that a lot of those women were talking about the fact that they feel like they have to wear like an armor, right? Like they have to kind of prepare themselves going out, and being a strong Black woman is kind of what that armor is. So it's this facade or this like this extra layer of protection that I put on in order to be sure that I can't be touched by racialized trauma or like by the stressors that come from racial discrimination. And in that, I think from what you were saying, Stephen, like sorry, it's so hard not to call you Dr. Kniffley, but from what you were saying, Stephen, that because of the way that we grow up as hypervigilant as we are, we also become vigilant of one another, and that creates divisiveness. And so, you know, these terms, Black girl magic and Black boy joy, I think much to what you were saying, Alaina, when you were first saying like how you initially had kind of internalized that message, in some ways it does at least encourage community, right? Because there is at least this identification of like, you know, when I see my homegirl doing well, I can call that Black girl magic, and she can say back to me like, well, girl, you too, because you got this going on, or that kind of thing. If I see a Black man doing well, or if I see him celebrating something or showing his affection for something, like I think about when I want to say T'Challa, that is awful.
Gotcha. Okay.
I think about when he passed away, Chadwick Boseman. I think about when Chadwick Boseman passed away, in that picture that was going around of him and, of course, I want to say his Black Panther name too. That's awful. Michael B. Jordan, of him and Michael B. Jordan embracing each other. And that had gone really viral because it was like, look at this love between brothers, right? And being able to celebrate that, because there is like this communal aspect to those terms. And so I say all of that to say, I wanted to kind of lead up to a question, which was, what are, I guess, kind of the protective factors that come with being able to use those terms? And in what ways can we help, you know, clients and each other to use those terms as like points of empowerment? And then what are the limitations that they might have, like where we need to be careful about misusing them or over applying them?
Yep, we needed a second. We needed a second. Ooh, that's a good question.
I might start off with, just because I know we're going to have a lot of really cool things to say about the ways in which we can foster that. And so the only thing I want to offer up in terms of a caution is to realize that not everything is joyful, right? And oftentimes we set up this expectation that if you are not happy all the time, that something is wrong with you, especially as Black individuals. And sometimes things just aren't happy, and that's all right. You know, there's the difference between being joyful sometimes and the difference between just being content. And while we can't always be joyful, we can always be content in whatever it is that we have, the circumstances that we find ourselves in, because we can say, I'm still here, I'm still present. The suffering might be going on, and it might suck real bad that I'm in this position, but I'm content with where I am and what I have. I think if we constantly lean into this idea of joy and of magic, it sets up this expectation that I must always be joyful. And if every day, every second of my life is magical, then surely that must mean something is wrong with me. And so letting folks know that joy is temporary, it's something we certainly should celebrate, but being content is something that we can lean into all the time.
Yeah, I think that's a great point in terms of one of the limitations that exists, right? Not necessarily giving that expectation to Black boys or Black women that they're always happy. Sorry, go ahead, Alaina. My bad.
Oh, no, it's fine. So when I think about as a practitioner, like as a clinician, when I'm in the space, you know, one thing I think therapists loves to say, feelings aren't facts, right? And so I think to Stephen's point, see, we're going to get it. Before it's over, we're going to get it. To Stephen's point, the one thing I love to do with my clients, especially Black clients or clients of color, is I'm intentional about creating a space where anything they bring to me is okay. So if today it's anger is just as valid as joy or fear. And really educating on how they all have a purpose. They serve a purpose. And what does that purpose mean for you? Because I like Stephen said, just this idea that people constantly have to be okay. I think that's what brings a lot of people in depressed and anxious, is because there's an expectation that like I should be achieving at this level. And I think someone even put in the comments at one point, they said, it feels like we're elevated, but now we have to stay up there at all times. Well, that's unreasonable. Right. That's just not achievable. And perfection, it's nothing we'll ever reach. So I think when I think about the limits, it's more of, again, I keep going back to this thing when we were talking earlier, free expression, just understanding I can take ownership of myself, my experience, and that's okay. Mine doesn't have to be yours. It doesn't make me any less than, right? Like, even coming to this panel, I was a little intimidated. I know who I'm on this panel with. And I'm like, I know what they're doing, you know? But that's the other thing, right? I am me and I come with my own. And I fit just as well into this situation or this makeup. Right. And so I think it's also teaching Black people, because even something I've learned through my own work, I've spent so much of my life trying to fit the expectation that society has set for me as a Black woman, right? We've talked about some of those tropes of how we're trying to fight through some of those. And so I think about just allowing people a space just to take ownership of themselves and who they want to be. And I think that goes back to Black Girl Magic is, again, I keep coming back to reclamation, like whether it's all beautiful, it's not all beautiful all the time, but the process itself can be, the ups, the downs, all of it can be, if we just allow people the space to, I don't know how I want to say that, if we just allow people the space to exist how they want to. I think that's how I want to say that.
Yeah, that, like, all of these things have their own limitations in the sense that we can't, or we shouldn't tell people that they can only be one way all the time, right? And that is the only way that we're willing to accept them, and that's the only way that we will be able to understand them, right? I wonder, and just, again, this is kind of throwing out a question for you guys, like, do you think that there is a way for us to extract the goodness from those terms and throw away the like negativity or the limitations that those terms give as well? Are those terms still constructive for us to be using?
So I think I would offer two things in the space. The first one is this idea of intentionality, right? Mm-hmm. So the more that we use a word, the less meaningful that word becomes. Because, like, I think about buzzwords even in our therapeutic communities, like, I don't know, strategy, or what's like some other, like, diversity, or, you know, inclusion, like these words that have become more buzzwords that have lost their meaning. I mean, that's why we had to start saying, instead of racism, like white supremacy, because when people started hearing racism, instantly people leaned into, well, I'm not racist, so I have no role in that. And now we've had to lean into white supremacy to remind people, no, we're talking about a system, not you individually, because you are a part of that system that makes you complicit in it by virtue of being who you are. And so I think there's intentionality, and that's one way we can continue to reclaim the meaning of the words. Another thing to remind people of is that if race indeed is a social construct, then that means that we are all living in imaginary boxes that at any given time we have the ability to step out of, if we just so choose to do that, and to see that the box that we're imposing on ourselves and have been imposed on us aren't real. Mm-hmm. So we always have the ability to step outside of those. So if someone comes up to me and says, because you're a Black male, you must do this, this, and this, I can say, that's your definition. That's based on your perception of a social construct in terms of my racial identity that I don't agree with. And so I choose to go a different route. And I have the ability to do that. And so intentionality is really important. And then also recognizing that we have choice when it comes to how we identify, and being able to use those words to highlight what the identification looks like.
Mm-hmm. I think intentionality applied to what we choose to internalize, right? So, like, we don't have to take in everybody's definitions of what they give to us, right? So just because somebody says that in a particular situation, they expect that we will pop off, or they expect that we will become dangerous, or we will become violent, or that we will smile in the face of an adversity, doesn't mean that that's what it has to be. And so I think it is important to be intentional about what are you allowing to actually penetrate your psyche and then turn into action in how it is that you respond to situations. So if I like the message that when I do something and it's something that's out of the norm for people within my same peer group or people within my same racial group or my same gender group, right? Like if I like the idea that if I do something that's outside of the norm or something that is considered to be extraordinary within that realm, that Black girl magic will be applied to that, then I can embrace that if I want to. Do you know what I mean? But if I also instead want to be like, well, or that was just Tiffany magic. Do you know what I mean? Then that's something that I can say also. And I think that we have to get to a space where we have a better interplay between what is like a healthy sense of self and a healthy sense of like self-confidence and self-worth. And it doesn't always have to be applied to the collective, right? That it doesn't always have to be that if I do something awful, then that means I was playing into a stereotype of what Black women do, right? I'm thinking about, sorry, y'all, I watch a lot of like current stuff. So I'm thinking about, and I don't know if y'all watch Real Housewives of Potomac, but I will explain the situation. So, well, nod or let me know if you do. Do you watch it? So I don't have to explain all of it. Okay. Something told me, Stephen, that you did not watch that. So Real Housewives of Potomac, there are Black women that are on there, and there was a fight that took place between two of the Black women that are on there. And there is like a lot of criticism coming towards the one who they feel initiated the fight about that's not the way, like this is what they expect from Black women. This is what they think that we'll do. And that's not the way that we should act, and, you know, so on and so forth, because it plays into this larger narrative. And so rather than it being this individual had a response in a particular moment that they felt was appropriate and fitting for the moment, instead there's the weight of you have all of America watching you, and they all are saying that you are now this angry Black woman who is not in control of her faculties. And I think that we have to do a better job of differentiating out like our own individualistic identities and values and ways that we respond in situations, and how we like kind of imprint that onto the rest of the race. And I think that works both in positive and negative circumstances.
So listening to you both, thinking, a lot of the conversation is, you know, aiding people in not internalizing these things. So how do we do that, right? Like, how do you help educate an entire culture, an entire group of people? How do we get, and asking this question because I already have my own thoughts on the answer and everything, but like, you know, I'm thinking about access to resources, right? Like, how do we start to help people learn how to do this? How are we interrupting these? How are we going from racial legacy to racial literacy?
Mm-hmm.
How do we do that for our community so that we don't overuse these terms, so that they don't continue to play into the stereotypes? Thoughts?
So if I could offer up two things here. The first one would be the idea that we can't be passive consumers of the media.
Mm-hmm.
The media is intentionally designed to create a narrative that paints Black and brown folks as, you know, dumb, deviant, and dangerous individuals. I mean, if you look at the caricatures of various shows, where either the buffoon, the Sambo, the Mandingo, with the Jezebel, with the Queen, we're all of these archetypes that are connected to the Black and brown experience. And if we just allow those things to wash over us without a critical analysis, our brains internalize those things and then assume that that's how we're supposed to act and behave as people that look like the people on the screen. And so when we see things in the media, when we see things on TV, when we watch movies and shows, we have to be mindful of the messages that are being communicated to us and then actively blocking the negative narratives connected to those. So that's the first thing, is we can't be passive consumers of media.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing is to remind ourselves of our actual history. So whenever we look in our school books or things like that, it seems like Black folks have either only been slaves or have only fought for social justice since the 1960s. But there is an entire history and legacy of Black people doing awesome stuff for thousands and thousands of years. So if you think about Mansa Musa, who was the richest black men, the richest men that ever lived. Literally, he has so much money that every country that he went into on his pilgrimage, he depressed their entire economies because he was just giving out so much gold that he made gold worthless in the countries that he was going through. If you think about, Timbuktu, if you think about like all of these, the Egyptian culture, all these places that are reflective of black and brown folks that have existed much longer than our experience in the U.S. has, then we can remind ourselves that we have a long legacy, a long history of providing culture, of providing science, mathematics, history, etc., to the U.S., to other parts of the world, outside of what we just see in regards to us being slaves and us fighting for social justice here in America.
Mm-hmm. I think a lot of what you had said around being able to, in that process of moving to racial literacy, that also includes the fact that we have coping strategies and we have like available responses that have been effective for us in the past, and that can still be effective for us now. I think is an important aspect that we have to be more intentional about using in our, when we're raising children, using in our education, using in our therapeutic practices, and in talks like these, to be able to help people to remember that all is not lost, right? So our only coping skills or our only strategies for being able to deal with racial adversity or with, racism or oppression is not to necessarily say, okay, well, then I have to be extraordinary in order to be able to get out of the reach of oppression, right? Or I have to smile when I'm not feeling like smiling, or I have to be better than all of my counterparts, including my Black counterparts, in order to be able to really be successful or really be able to measure myself as being successful. And I think the way that we talk to one another, the way that we treat our children, the way that we even have conversations with like peers that we might have when we have like our venting sessions and things of that nature, we have to get more into that part of how it is that, like, that resiliency piece that you're referring to, like the fact that we have actually been able to overcome so many things. And I was talking to a client who was saying that that ancestral like DNA makes it to where when she experiences racialized trauma, it hits different, right? It's like I feel like I feel like generations of trauma when that happens. And I had to remind her that your whole ancestral history is not one of trauma. There's also a lot of victory. There's also a lot of overcoming. There's also a lot of empowerment that's happened in your ancestral history. And so if you can be connected to the trauma, you have to also allow yourself to tap into that empowering or that empowerment that's happened. And so I think that has to be the part of the conversations that we really highlight in our kitchen table talks and in our discussions with one another, because I don't know that we allow our conversations to go there oftentimes.
In asking the question, my mind went straight to community. I think, Stephen was talking earlier about how we internalize these things and then all of a sudden we fear our own. My parents tell stories all the time about, like, if I was down to my neighbors, they would check me. Then they calling my mama. I'm going home. She's checking me. There was this deeper rooted community as well, because in my mind, I think about, listen, I love Beyonce, but I'm never going to be Beyonce. I may not ever have that level of reach to touch as many people. And so we're back to intentionality, right? I'm very intentional, especially when I interact with Black counterparts. I'm very intentional about how I engage, how I'm creating community with them, so that it can be a space where if I know something, like, I'm in a sorority. So when I was on my line, if I knew something, everybody on my line knew it. If I had it, everybody had it. Mm-hmm. And so that's my mentality now, after having done some of my own racial healing, of like, I actually don't have to be afraid of you. Like, Black Girl Magic feels so much more powerful now because I can celebrate Tiffany having her own business, even though I'm not there yet. Because my hope is that she's made it. So now she's we can live. She can show me, she can talk me through. And so I've in asking that question, I was really thinking like, man, community is going to be so much more important. Because as I have access to resources, like I'm from the West End of Louisville, there are things they don't have there that I have now. And so being intentional about, again, if I got it, you got it. And I think that, again, goes back to Black Girl Magic, Black Boy Joy, is also allowing people to know I have access to this now and you can too. Like, I'm seeing joy now. I'm seeing it happen. Now I'm seeing women who look like me achieving things. Will I achieve at the same level again? Y'all never gonna pay $300 for a concert ticket for me. I wish, but it gives me, there's hope there now that, well, maybe not with Beyonce, but there's hope for me now that there are things that are achievable that maybe I wasn't able to see at a certain point in my life. So I know earlier there was a conversation here about community as a tool. And I think that's important, and we have to get back to that. And we're seeing a lot of that now through the social justice movement, right? Change today, change tomorrow. The Kroger in West End of Louisville shut down abruptly. All of a sudden, we all getting together, scrambling with groceries, delivering them, right? Therapists for Protester Wellness. It's ran by a Black woman, being really intentional about making sure that low cost or free services are being provided to people on the front lines. And so we're seeing this resurgence now of community, which I think will help take us from racial legacy to racial literacy. As you know, my dad and mom were not okay with therapy until I became a therapist. Like, I asked to go to therapy as a teenager. It was like, go to that prayer closet. You're going to pray. We're going to be okay. We're going to church Sunday. Okay. And it's like, okay. But now that we have access, we're having different conversations around mental health. And so for those listening, I guess maybe part of what I want to leave everyone with is encouragement to engage with that community. Don't hoard your resources because someone may need that. And maybe you had access to it so that you could give it out. So that's probably a little bit of a tangent, but.
No, I think that totally makes sense. And as you were kind of moving into like that mental health piece, right? It made me think about some of the limitations that we were discussing, and the fact that a lot of that shows up as imposter syndrome, right? So because I feel like I have to be joyful all the time, when in fact what I'm feeling is contentment or satisfaction or maybe some agitation, right? Or a whole range or host of other emotions. Or because I feel like I need to be strong all the time, and I need to be like long suffering and like striving towards something at all times. And, you know, when in fact I might be feeling kind of lackadaisical, or I may be feeling a little bit unmotivated, right? Like, because of those feelings that we might have that don't fit within those tropes that have kind of been assigned within those terms. I think people can feel like there's people assign to me a level of importance, or assign to me a level of stature that I don't feel like I deserve, right? Or people assign to me a level of like emotional resilience that I don't actually experience in my life, right? And so I do think that that's a reason that a lot of African American clients present to therapy, is because it's like people think that I have everything together, but in fact, like, I experience a lot of very vulnerable and dark emotions that I don't ever feel like I have the space to decompress and talk about what those feelings are and how they've been affecting my performance and my ability to even experience the spoils of my work, right? What do you guys think about that? Do you see clients that present with kind of this imposter syndrome, and what do you say to people if they are having a hard time with like that cognitive dissonance between what the expectation is and what they're living in terms of their reality of emotional experience?
Well, and I'll give Steven the time too. For me, I understand that I may be the first space a person encounters where I normalize that. So that really, when I start with a client, that is generally, outside of building rapport, I am attempting to normalize as many of those varying emotions as I can. So even in saying like, oh yeah, I felt anger like that before. And then of course, me being really into the somatic stuff, we go right to the body. How's your body feeling that? What's the pattern around that? But I think for me therapeutically, the first place I go, especially with Black clients of color, if they've not had the experience of that being normalized for them, we go straight there. That's my first place, so that they know like, okay, I can feel this, because if I don't even allow myself to feel it, I'm never going to learn how to cope with it. So let's make it okay that you feel it. And then we work through, all right, now that I'm feeling it, what is it telling me I need? How is it showing up in my body? How is it showing up in my behavior? Is there a way to alter this? What do we do? And that goes into the longer term work as we build relationship. But that's where I start.
Yeah, that giving permission. That's so important.
Great point there. And the only thing I would add is until you can have a party for yourself, you will never be happy. Right. And so if we're doing things for other folks' approval or validation or affirmation or things like that, so they will come to our party, then we'll always be in a vulnerable state where we're always looking to someone else to fulfill some sort of happiness for us. But when you can truly have a party for yourself, you don't care who else is there. You don't care what else is around. You're going to put on your music. You're going to put up your streamers. You're going to put up your balloons that say you're awesome. And you're going to go out there and do your own thing, right? So when you can have a party for yourself without any expectation of anybody else being involved, that's when you know you truly reach that state of happiness, of contentment, because then you're doing things for yourself and to fulfill something from within, as opposed to looking for without externally for someone to fill you up in some form or fashion.
That's good.
I love that. Party for yourself. I'm going to start using that. Is that okay?
I wrote it down.
No copyright on it. And I also just want to point out, it does appear that we're all Greek in this space. So that's pretty awesome.
Just had to do it.
That's right. One time for the one time. That's good.
A little partial to Zetas, but you know, we all make choices.
One of my really good friends is a Zeta. We'll let it slide. We'll let it slide.
Sorry.
My best friend is
so just I feel like Alaina, you were able to give. So sorry, let me back up. Brittany Johnson, who's one of our colleagues, did ask the question of if each one of us, in wrapping up, can kind of give a coping skill or affirmation that we use. And I think we were kind of sort of answering that through these last two tips that you and Stephen were speaking to. Which you were saying, kind of giving permission, and giving some normalizing to the fact that there is that emotional experience. And it sounds like for you, Stephen, you know, having the ability to give yourself a party before ever expecting anybody else to show up for you. You need to show up for yourself. And I think I would just say, and I know that this is something that has been used in terms of this, but I want to kind of emphasize why. I would say journaling. And the reason that I say that is that I think a lot of our internalizing of these stereotypes and these notions about who we have to be and what standards we're supposed to attain are things that happen or things that we reinforce in our meta thoughts. So our thoughts about our thoughts. And I think oftentimes through journaling, what we're able to do is when we're able to get those thoughts that are kind of in the forefront out, we can go back and reread that journaling and see what thoughts are coming about our own thoughts, right? So being able to get more aware of that meta thought can be really helpful, because we might not know the ways in which those tropes are really kind of integrating with our mental health, and the ways that we're kind of holding ourselves hostage to a particular idea about who we should be and how we should perform in particular situations. So that would be my tip.
I want to throw one other thing out there. Something that I do for myself is I do my best to practice being grounded or being present. So doing things like, just like before I got on this call, I was like, all right, girl, we got this. Stretching, grabbing my joints, stretching it out, like becoming more present in my current moment. Because a lot of times when our primal brain comes online like that, we're operating with old information, or we're not allowing our whole self to really process everything. And so just taking that moment to become reconnected is enough for us to then begin really processing information and making more appropriate decisions. versus us operating off really, really, really old information or really, really old experiences from however long ago. So engaging your senses, like I said, I like to mess with my face, you know, stretch it out, drop my jaw, open it up, but just really becoming connected again. It'll put me in this moment, and now I can actually take in the information and then move forward. So that's something that I personally do.
That's good.
Too. Y'all, that hour went by fast.
It did.
Faster than I thought.
I'll hop back on. Thank you all. That was so awesome. I really, really appreciate it. Before we end here, I want you to all kind of I want to make sure that you all get the word out on what you're all doing. I know everybody's doing a little bit of something different. So anything you want people to know about, any groups you're running or any, future talks you're doing, etc.
Sure. So with Best Black Mental Health Services, we are doing a kind of campaign called Candle in the Darkness, shedding light on mental health. And so with that, we are attaching an anonymous Google form. And the idea there is to normalize mental health experiences. And so if you submit a Google form anonymously, we will have an actor that will kind of portray that as a monologue about a mental health experience to really be able to normalize these different kind of micro moments we have regarding mental health that we may not actually realize is a mental health moment. And then also we have upcoming a workshop on anti-racism that will be coming soon. And we are also, there was one other thing I wanted to say and I forgot what it was. I can't remember.
Is that your CEU or is that something else?
Yes, that would be a
okay.
CEU. Mm-hmm.
So that's for professionals, right?
Yes, that is for professionals, for anybody that's doing client-based work. So that can be for therapists, educators, and other professionals that are working with clients, ways to interact with clients from a space of anti-racism.
Awesome.
Well, other than my day-to-day therapy, individual therapy work, I facilitate a group for transgendered individuals Monday nights. Adults preferably, so 18 and older, but it's a small group currently, but it's really good, and it's a process group, so you bring what you have and we process. So there's that. And then I'm also engaged with Therapists for Protester Wellness, so if there are any active activists who are looking for therapy or resources, we have a Facebook group, we have an Instagram, there are resources available, so I'm actively engaged with that. But those are the big things for me right now.
Awesome. And how can people join your group if they were interested in the group?
Oh, absolutely. So contact Meridian Behavioral Health, press 1. I literally want to get you to Margaret and she'll get you scheduled. Yeah. So contact Meridian Behavioral Health. It's out off DuPont Circle. We're not in the office right now, but still holding group weekly.
Okay, great.
I had to look at my calendar to see what else I have left to do.
So what are you not doing?
Yeah.
Maybe we should just ask you about free days or free hours.
There is none. There's none of them. So organizational wise, we have our Collective Care Center, which is one of very few racial trauma clinics that exist here in the U.S. We provide free and accessible service for those folks that have experienced race-based stress and trauma. We provide individual, family, and group therapy from an evidence-based standpoint for those folks that have experienced racism and discrimination. We have 2 groups. One is on Wednesday from 11 to 12. The other one is on Friday from 11 to 12. We're also looking to start a youth group very soon here. To be able to provide support to those kids that have also experienced racism and discrimination, because we know that they need a space of their own. As a part of that, I also provide a certification in racial trauma therapy that we are currently training a little over 200 clinicians in actively right now. And we'll have 200 more clinicians that are out there equipped and able to support those folks that have experienced racism and discrimination. On the 16th, I'm speaking at the Marriage and Family Therapy Conference on a panel there around racism and discrimination. On the 23rd, I'm speaking at the South Carolina Psychological Association on racism and discrimination. On the 24th, there's an event that the Urban League is putting together to hold spaces for Black individuals that have experienced racism and discrimination, especially around the challenges that we're having as a community right now. I'm giving a speech at Humana on the 27th. And then I'm doing 2 events for the University of Louisville Medical School on the 30th around pediatrics and racism and discrimination.
No,
I
that
think
was
Awesome.
October.
yeah.
That was just his October.
Yeah, I was going to say,
Right.
Alaina, I think I know who you were referencing earlier when you were talking about joining this panel.
Right.
I feel the same way. I'm like,
I'm just trying to be helpful while I can. I know I really believe in that quote that says, I hope I get to heaven and I have nothing left to give because I've given it all while I've been here. And I'm just hoping to leave all my gifts on the table while I can.
well, I think you're doing a really great job of that.
Thank you so much.
And any resources that you all have, we will post on our Wellness Summit resource page. So if anybody wants to find the book Alaina was talking about, which I put in the chat box twice and typed the name wrong both times. But we'll have the proper title on our website if you would like to access that. And any of the other upcoming events or groups that anyone's hosting, we'll have access to that as well. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you for being our panelists tonight. I really, really loved this topic, and I can't wait for people to watch it on our playback on YouTube because I think it's going to be really popular. So thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Bye, you all.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.